Welcome to the Troubled Artists Podcast, Episode 22, Ray Hartjen.
Welcome back to the Troubled Artists Podcast. Today I am here with writer and musician Ray Hartjen. Ray Hartjen is from Mission Viejo, California, whose 5-decade career has spanned multiple industries, but has always centered on storytelling. He has been quoted in national media, contributed widely on topics from sports to business, and authored Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh in 2022, and Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma in 2024. And with this third book, The Indy 500, a year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing, releasing in 2025. Diagnosed with multiple myeloma in 2019, he continues to fight cancer while performing with his acoustic band, the Chronic Padres, and draws on his academic background with degrees from Eastern Kentucky University and the University of Washington. So thank you again, Ray, for being on the show. So before we begin, I like to ask this question. Tell us in your own words, who is Ray Hartjen?
First of all, Caesar, thank you for having me on the show. It's a wonderful opportunity and I appreciate it. Thanks. You know, who I am, I discovered, I think, maybe about 20 years ago that, based on what I was doing in my career, so I'm a storyteller, right? So whether it's through, music and writing a song where you're trying to tell a story in 2 or 3 minutes to an article, a blog post, a book, or what have you. My time in corporate communications, public relations, marketing, it's just when I started thinking about it, it's, it's all a process of communication, but we humans, we like to kind of ingest things in stories, right? It comes to us from a very early age, very organically. It's like, mommy and daddy, please tell me a story. And so, that was the way that I was discovering myself, trying to get my work done. And so I just kind of adopted that moniker, a couple of decades ago. Said, I'm a storyteller.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm also a storyteller as well. My art is in filmmaking, so I'm constantly, having ideas run in my head, and I'm writing down ideas and like I'm having like all these like creative like thoughts, so
We all have these notebooks, don't we?
oh
Just
yeah.
filled up with little tiny things. I probably have, I don't know, 400 partial songs written, just waiting for the other part to come about, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's maybe the curse of some of the storytellers out there is that we have a lot of starts, a lot of moments of inspiration, and then got to jot that down really fast before they go away.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've had ideas that hit me at like 2, 3 in the morning, and I have to write it down because there have been times where I told myself like, oh, I'll write it when in the morning when I wake up, and then it's gone, and it's like, oh, like I should have wrote it down. And so I always make sure to write it down, whether it's like on like a notebook or just like on my phone, like the notes app, or jot it down on my laptop. I just gotta write something down because then when I look back on it, it's like, oh, that was a good idea. Let me expand on that. So
And it's so important
Mhm.
for those of you out there listening to say, you don't need to necessarily write it down. You do need to write it down because you can sit there in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning going, okay, I'm going to remember this for sure. I'm going to remember this for sure. I'm going to remember this for sure. And then you go back to sleep and wake up in the morning going, what was that thing I was trying to remember last night? Well, it was a hook for a song, a plot twist for a book, or for you as a filmmaker, a different shot that you want to get, or maybe, the inspiration for something kind of unique and interesting just to, break up the flow of a particular scene or what have you. So yeah, write it down, folks. Have something close by, even if it's notes on your phone, just a quick little note dictation. Capture that before you lose that catalyst.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I feel like, yeah, that's just important. And not all ideas, are going to be this great thing, but it's always good to, just kind of have it in your back pocket. And even if you don't use it now, you may look on it, days, months, years later, and it's like, oh, maybe I can go back to that and then, expand on it. So yeah, it's always
That's
good
what
to.
like brainstorming as part of a team or a group, right? It's rarely like the first idea that comes out, or even like an idea that comes out. The kind of the rules of brainstorming is write it all down. They're all great ideas, but then it's iteration of an idea. You have something, and it's like it's like ABC, but that like sparks another idea, and it's like, well, what about DEF, and then you start kind of working things out, and then you end up with this more creative, more comprehensive, more collaborative type of that really works. books. That's the thing I really like and enjoy about working with a team, a creative team, and brainstorming a process like that. It's like, the iteration of an idea as it goes along. It's rarely just born. It usually has to evolve to eventually get there. So, yeah, never give up hope. And then, revisit those things because, a lot of times you can put a piece together here, like, here's a little piece, but here's something from a couple of weeks later, and here's something from a month later, and, put the three pieces together, you end up with a, really great deliverable. So, revisit those notes and those little bits of inspiration you get and see what kind of partners up well with something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, collaboration is definitely important because, you don't have to do everything yourself. It's always good to, connect with people and other artists and, just share what you have, they may have ideas that you would have never thought of. And it's like, oh, wow, that's really cool. Let me write it down. And, and again, even though it's like an idea, it may not be totally fleshed out. But like you said, it's good to just evolve, it's not an idea isn't born. It's just sort of
Mm-hmm.
evolves. Like you said, that is really good to know. And, just sort of get that first draft out of the way because, usually the first draft is, 90% of it is like not very good, but at least you have something written down on the page because you can edit something. You can't edit nothing, so,
Yeah.
so yeah, just, I would say if you have an idea or something, just write it down, no matter how terrible it may be, it's just good to have it and then, just kind of build upon that. So yeah, no, I totally relate with,
I think I
that.
think Stephen King said it, you write with the door closed, but you edit with the door open. And in the writing field, what we look for is beta readers, people that, might represent your target audience, and give them that first draft and then collect feedback from it. Ask, did you enjoy reading? Did it pique your interest? What changes would you suggest? So, it's always important to get a little feedback from your audience. And it's very scary too, Caesar, right? You have things and, whatever you create, it's always going to be somewhat personal. But like, my second book, Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma, it's about as personal as it can get, right? For me, it chronicles my life as a multiple myeloma patient. And for those of you out in the audience that might not be aware of it, multiple myeloma is a blood cancer, an incurable blood cancer. And I was unaware of it until I got diagnosed with multiple myeloma in March of 2019. But, writing that book, I wanted it to be a resource for folks in the community, be it patients or caregivers or allies or what have you. But, I had to, be honest with my health and, what I was feeling along my journey, along my fight. And those are very personal things. And, when you set it out there for folks, it gives people a peek behind the curtain. And, you have to be truthful, have to be honest. And it can be, kind of scary when it's super personal.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I've been in that situation before, like, and I think a lot of other artists can relate to that because it's always kind of scary, putting yourself out there, and especially like you said, if it's a very personal piece, because it's, you're always like, oh, what if this, what if that, or you get through like the whole like imposter syndrome, am I not good enough? And, like, well, this person has more success than I do. And, so, and I think that kind of stops a lot of people from doing this. And, I just feel like, you just got to get those negative thoughts just out of the way. You just got to get them out of your head and just be positive. Just keep on writing, keep on doing what you love, and just continue to do it. And you're going to get feedback. You're going to get good feedback. You're going to get bad feedback. That's just part of the process. And it's always good to sort of just take into like account, like the ideas or like the suggestions that people have. It knows that that you're listening to other people's ideas, and you don't have to take every single critique very personally, but it can help steer you in kind of a different direction where it's like, I never thought of it like that. Maybe I could try that for my next book or my next film or my next painting, whatever art form you may be doing. Yeah, I just feel like it's important to just to listen to people, because again, like we said, you can't do everything yourself. If you try to figure out every single little thing and do, you might drive yourself crazy. But like, again, just kind of, if there are going to be those days where you kind of need to just step back, take a deep breath, and reset, that's totally fine. We can't be creative 24/7, 365, days.
Yeah.
So, if you need to kind of step back, have it, and
And
then
then when I think it's also important when incorporate feedback from others. You said it. You don't have to take that feedback and make changes, right? It's there's the staying, having a degree of integrity of yourself, of and your vision of what you want. And sometimes it is that provocative stuff. Sometimes the best art is the art that really almost insults, right? It jars an audience into, looking at something a little bit differently. And it's, I think a lot of artists, whether they're writers, musicians, painters, filmmakers, what have you, what they want to avoid is the meh, like the no reaction, love it or hate it. That's fantastic. It's that middle ground it's, that people just don't care enough to have a reaction. That's probably what you want to avoid, right? So, yeah, it's like, humor. My wife tells me all the time, it's like, you're not as funny as you think you are. That's because sometimes, humor just ends up, biting. It's, somebody feels like as though they're the butt of the joke, right? And nobody likes to be the butt of the joke. Or at least most people don't like to be the butt of the joke. But yeah, you artists out there, collect that feedback, understand what your target audience kind of wants and likes, but also be true to yourself and knowing that what you're really looking for is a reaction, that you want your work to be memorable, and noticeable.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's important to know, just like having a reaction, and you know, and even if it's not like the reaction you intended, like let's say you do like a dramatic film or something like that, and maybe people find it funny at some points where you like, oh, well, that wasn't supposed to be funny, but they have that sort of reaction to it, and then you kind of look back on it and it's like, okay, what did I do that made it have that reaction? So it does kind of get you like your brain thinking and kind of like steering in a different direction of
Yeah.
how you could fix that or how you can improve on that, and yeah, like you said, if they have like no reaction at all or nothing, it's like you can't really do much of that,
Mhm.
and so it's good to have, like you said, that reaction, whether it be a good one, the right one, or a bad one, the wrong one, so it's
And
good to mhm.
in listening to you, I'm just reminded of Eddie Murphy, the great comedian, actor, about, I don't know, it's probably about 40 years ago. He came out with a song. He's working with Rick James, and came out with a song, My Girl Wants to Party All the Time, and here it was at this point in time, he's a comedian. I don't know if he'd even started starring in movies yet. And, somebody asked him, is this like a comedy song, or is he like really trying to have like a real pop song? And he's like, well, if you think it sucks and you laugh at it, well, then maybe it's a comedy song. If you like it and want to dance to it, maybe it's like a real pop song. So I just kind of liked his. I remembered that from 40 years ago. His approach, and it's like, this is something I want to do, and I'm going to give it a shot and see what people think.
Yeah, no, I again, I relate with that, and I feel like, yeah, it's like whatever art form you do, whether it's music or writing, it's always good to just look back on it and just continue to do it, and get those reactions, get those feedback, collaborate with others, it's always just important to have that. Um, I do want to get into just like the work that you've done, specifically like those three books that I mentioned, Immaculate, Me, Myself, and Multiple Myeloma, the Indy 500. And, if you could just tell me what your creative process was behind those three books.
Yeah, it's a good question, and you actually prompted me for this question, in in an email that you shared with me, a week ago or so. And when I really started thinking about the first book, the creative process behind it, not a whole lot of magic to it, on the Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh book. It was just getting started with it, right? So the idea of the book is, my co-author of the book is a friend of mine named Tom Olenek. He grew up in Pittsburgh, and he went through a very painful time in Pittsburgh's economic history. Here it was, this city that was built, on industry, on steel, very particular. And then a bunch of things happened in the mid 70s that conspired to really make the domestic steel industry, kind of go away. And, Pittsburgh needed to reinvent itself. And it did over time. Pittsburgh today shows up on all sorts of lists of most livable cities, not only in the United States, but in the world. It's viewed as an academic center, medical research, technology center. They're really a new economy success story. That new economy, I'm putting in air quotes, that was something that we kind of heard an awful lot about, like in the early 2000s, right? And so Pittsburgh had this, new economy success story at the end of their deindustrialization transformation, but all the Rust Belt cousins didn't. They still struggle. Cleveland, Buffalo, Akron, Gary, Indiana, places like that. They've still, kind of struggled to get through it. And in Tom's mind, it was the Steelers that had galvanized the city. When the city needed its heroes, they was able to look at its football team, which up until 1972 had not been very good. For 39 years, they'd been mediocre at best and kind of horrible, really. And then all of a sudden it became very good. And it was a team that was kind of built in a mirror image of Pittsburgh, tough blue collar type of team. It's matched the people of Pittsburgh, people, who took showers when they got home from work, not taking a shower before they went to work in the morning, right? It was that lunch pail type of mentality. And, Tom had this idea for this book going around in his head for like 20 years. He would always tell his family about it and his friends. I had heard about it for well over 10 years. And then, it was, part of it was this impetus, Caesar, with me being diagnosed with cancer. And, I just want to share this one little exercise that soon after my diagnosis, I conducted for myself. It's a timeline exercise. So, you out there in the audience, if you have a piece of paper and something to write with, that's great. If not, just kind of use your mind. And that is, draw a horizontal line from left to right. And then at the far left-hand side, make a little tick mark. And on the far right-hand side, make a tick mark. Go back to that left-hand tick mark and write the letter B. That represents your birth. And then on the far right-hand side, you're already one step ahead of me, I'm sure. Write the letter D. That represents your death. Now, what you have is a timeline of your life on this planet. Now, the hard part comes is when you just take a moment, you think, where do you believe? Where do you think you are on your timeline? And Caesar, for years, I facilitated that exercise as part of a time management course that I trained others in. And, at the time I was in my late 30s and early 40s, and I would just, kind of haphazardly throw my mark right in the middle because Caesar, I was going to live forever, right? But when I revisited this exercise after being diagnosed with multiple myeloma, I said to myself, intellectually and emotionally, it's like, hey, Ray, you're further to the right than you were before your diagnosis, right? And so, what does that mean to you? And so I thought about it and thought, what that means to me is that I think, like a lot of humans, that I've been guilty of taking time for granted too often. And so I thought more about that. Well, how does that manifest itself in your life? And for me, that was, well, not only did I take time for granted, but because I took time for granted, I took people and relationships for granted as well. And, I kind of distilled all of that into just a quick little motto: if not now, when? So as a starving musician, we're always looking for ways to get, a few extra bucks at a gig. So you get a t-shirt with a logo on the front and a kind of a pithy little saying in the back: if not now, when? It's on a t-shirt, right? And so, I used that motto when in speaking with Tom about the book. I just grabbed him by the shoulders and said, Tom, man, you've been talking about this book for decades. You've been talking to me about it for at least 10 years. If not now, when? Let's get started with it. Let me get started with the book. And if I should happen to veer off of your vision, we'll just course correct. But it's a lot easier to course correct when you have some momentum, you got some speed, you're going, as opposed to when you're just like inert and you're sitting there. It's very tough to course correct. You don't have anything to course correct on. So we did. We started the book. A year and a half later, the book was done. We didn't have to course correct at all. That's a book I'm super proud of because we had to creatively tell a story. You can't be as provocative with the title of Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh, without talking about, one, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and two, talking about Pittsburgh. So you have, this history component and you have the sports component. How can you tell both without alienating one of your audiences? if you're a history buff, you might not care too much about the sports, but if you're sports buff, you might not care too much about the history. So I'm very proud of the way that we kind of creatively linked the two together. I kind of view it as these horizontal strands of DNA that are connected with these key moments that we built initially around the Immaculate Reception, one of the most memorable plays in NFL history. That's kind of like the that whole game between the at the time Oakland Raiders and the Pittsburgh Steelers. That is kind of like the connecting points between history and sports as we make this journey. So yeah, the creative process around that book in particular, Caesar, is just going back to maybe one message to all artists out there. You have the idea, just get started. If you want to write something, it sounds silly, but you just have to sit down and write, and it doesn't have to be a lot. If you're working on a novel, for example, and a 60,000 word novel, that's only 500 words a day for 120 days. In less than half a year, you have a book done, and that's just at 500 words a day. So, get started on something. If not now, when? See where you go.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. That's a really great story, and a very great quote. If not now, when? I'll definitely keep that in mind, when I'm, writing, or when I'm, kind of struggling to like, come up with something. If not now, when? That's really great to know. And I'm sure a lot of
Yeah,
other people.
Buffalo has morphed a little bit. There's another T-shirt out there with a Chronic Padres logo on the front, but on the back it says "Punch Today in the Face." I like to think of today is a gift. Once again, going back to that timeline exercise, Caesar. Today's a gift, and we know not everyone got to receive today as a gift, right? So how do we honor them? How do we honor ourselves? How do we honor the day? Let's make the most of it. Going back to that timeline exercise again, what's most important to you? What do you want to do? And who do you want to do it with? Who are all those people that mean the most to you? And, make the most out of each day. And, if you can do that, if you can punch today in the face, get today to know that you were here, you end up with, at the end of the day, this feeling of accomplishment, this sense of satisfaction, this sense of inner peace. And those are all things that we as humans like to feel. Right. And then, hopefully when you're laying in bed at night, and dozing off to sleep, you can kind of point over to tomorrow and say, I'm coming for you next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and definitely. I definitely need to check out that book, Immaculate, because I'm a big sports fan. I'm from Chicago, and so my team is the Bears. But yeah, no, I remember just like I like sports history in general. So yeah, I know like about the Steelers and that the play you were talking about, the Immaculate Reception. I remember just seeing that like on highlights on YouTube and stuff. And obviously, like you said, yeah, they've definitely since then they've have so many Super Bowl championships, and Terry Bradshaw and all, so they, yeah, so I definitely need to check that out. It sounds like a very interesting read, and I'll be sure the audience could check it out. I'll be sure to put like a link in the description to the book so other people could check that out as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
appreciate that. All the books are available wherever fine books are sold. I've been taught to say that from my publisher. The publisher of all three of the books you've mentioned is Morgan James Publishing. Excuse me, out of New York. And yeah, wherever books are sold, be it Barnes and Noble, the big one that starts with an A that I'm not usually supposed to say that much because other booksellers won't have a chance for your business as well. But yeah, they're available everywhere.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good to hear. How about like with me, myself, and my multiple myeloma? I mean, I know that was seemed like a very personal piece that you wrote. So what was sort of like the process with that? Like, what sort of got you into that mindset of wanting to tell your story living with multiple myeloma?
Yeah, I soon after I was diagnosed, I went to a group, a cancer patient support group meeting, and that was my first group meeting of any kind ever, right? And it was not just for myeloma patients, but it was just for all sorts of cancer patients, and there were a couple of caregivers in there as well. Excuse me. Those people, those brave cancer fighters, kind of taught me how to be a cancer patient, taught me how to approach this. My head was swimming. I'd been diagnosed like, 10 days beforehand. I didn't really know how to react, but I did recognize that, I had a moment of need, Caesar, and these people were reaching back and helping me, pulling me forward to where I needed to be, to where I wanted to be. And it was soon thereafter that, I said to myself, I want to be one of those types of people. I want to be one of those resources. It's also about that same time I'd been, featured on, in some news stories. And there's some videos, some news stories, and people through social media began to reach out to me, asking me questions. These were typically, newly diagnosed patients or caregivers of people, like spouses of newly diagnosed patients. And it's a tremendous honor when people do that. But I also, it was very much a one-to-one type of interaction. So I thought to myself, how could I make this a one-to-many? And I thought, well, why don't I just chronicle my experiences in a blog? And then I ended up turning that blog into a book. That's the impetus behind me, myself, and my multiple myeloma. I wanted to be a resource, a value-added resource for patients, caregivers, and allies. And it just, tells, my story and how I was feeling, the steps that I went through in my treatment, my ongoing treatment, and, try to approach topics that I think might be common to a lot of people. And I've been thrilled with the book. It's not nearly as big a seller as the Immaculate book, but that's okay because the engagement I get. I've had readers from around the world: New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, the United Kingdom, and these people have reached out to me via social media, to ask questions and other things like that, based on the book. And it's been the honor of my life. Other than getting married and raising 2 kids, the honor of my life is engaging with these brave cancer fighters around the world and just engaging with them. It's great. Maybe a month ago or so, my wife and I were at a art performance, and just before the curtain was rising and when it was going to start, I was just kind of browsing through Instagram. A guy had sent me a direct message, and he was recently diagnosed, and he hadn't started treatment yet. And he was talking about how he had read some of my things, and was scared, but he felt as though he couldn't talk to his family about it. It was such an honor that, here he was trusting me and being able to talk to me and reaching out to me in a safe environment, to talk about the beginnings of his treatment journey and his fight against myeloma, and get to the point where he could talk about how he felt with his wife and his children. So yeah, I'm super proud of that book. Net writers proceeds go to benefit the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. So it was important to me to write a book from the community to the community and to benefit the community. So and I also don't think it's a book about cancer. It's not a cancer book. I think it's a living book, right? We're all in this together. We all get something. It really does take a village for us to get through this crazy thing we call life. So I like to view it as a living book, not a cancer book.
Mm. Yeah. Well, that's really great to hear. And I'm glad that, like being diagnosed with multiple myeloma, it didn't stop you from being the creative person that you are. You are sharing your story with other people, and it's great to hear that other people are responding back to you, and you sort of became like this sort of voice of reason, to help someone go through this disease. And it's great that the profits are going to towards multiple myeloma. And it's just really great that like we said, it could be a little daunting to share something so personal, because you don't know what the reaction would be. I mean, it goes for anything, but especially something as scary as cancer. But
Funny, I was on a podcast not that long ago, a podcast about myeloma, and Helena, the host, asked me, it's like, hey, would you change your diagnosis? And I'm like, oh man, what a great question, and thought about it for just a couple of seconds, and I couldn't get my first reaction out of my head. And I thought, you know what? My first reaction, I think it's the true reaction. I don't want to have cancer. I do not want it. But I don't think I would change my diagnosis because of the way that, 6.5 years ago, that this fight I've had, how I've grown and how I've evolved as a human, as an artist. I'm a better person. And I've had these unbelievable interactions and engagements with others in the space, patients and caregivers. It's like I said, it's been an honor. And yeah, I would not go back and change my diagnosis. I don't want to have cancer, but it when I was first going through my journey, I read some things where there's some people out there that would say like the best day of their life was the day that they got diagnosed with cancer, because that's when they really started living. And I'm not at that point where I can say that that's the best day of my life, but I'm beginning to see their point more and more and more. That there's something that comes about that now sets your life on a trajectory that means so much more than the trajectory that my life had been on up to that point. Yeah, I'm also proud of that book. It's because it's so personal. I'm glad people have received it so well. It's been highly rated. I'm glad that the community is finding benefit in it. And if you happen to be a myeloma patient out there, hey, reach out to me if there's anything I can ever do for you. On all the socials, it's my name, Ray Hartjen, Hartjen, and I would love to be able to listen to your story.
That's nice. That's great to hear. Yeah, so it is really great that you were sharing that. I want to transition into that next book, Indy 500, a year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing. Like, how did that book come about? What was the creative process behind
Yeah.
that?
I'm glad you asked that. That's my latest book. It came out this year. When I was a kid, Caesar, I don't know what school you went to in the Chicagoland area, but when I was a kid, way back when, had the Scholastic America catalog. Did you have those? These little like tissue paper thin little catalog your teacher would pass out, and you'd select books and posters and stuff like that.
I think so. Yeah, like the Scholastic. I remember like the Scholastic Book Fair. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I remember those.
So the Scholastic America catalog, one time it came around, there's this book written by Hal Higdon called The Indy 500 30 Days in May. And I got that, geez, I was probably like in, fourth or fifth grade. And it was a chronicle of the 1970 Indianapolis 500. So it started on April 30th, the day before the track opened for practice, and it ended on race day, May 30th. 1970. And, I read that book and I was just like, early 70s race car drivers are kind of like astronauts, they're driving these, sleek, sexy cars, and, the danger that was involved, these horrific accidents caused severe injuries, and fatalities were not that uncommon. So they were these kind of like the maverick personalities. It got me just totally interested in the Indy 500 and in motorsports as a whole. And then a few years later, my father, a career military officer, got stationed in Indianapolis at a base that no longer exists, Fort Benjamin Harrison. And so then I actually got to go to the track itself. But that book, the Indy 500 30 Days in May, written by Hal Higdon, I read that book, 3-4 times a year for like almost 10 years. I read that book a lot. And I always wanted to update that book. It's like, here was a book that captured my interest. And I've been to the Indy 500 a whole bunch of times. I've had tickets since, like 1986. But I even went to my first Indy 500 race, it was 1979. And, the Indy 500 is just, it's my favorite sporting event to go to. It's not for everybody, but it is for me. And I wanted just to update that. It's like I read a book about the 1970 race. I read it in like 1973 or something like that. And that got me hooked on the racing. Like maybe I could update that book, write it, and turn it, somebody else into a race fan. So going back to a previous conversation of ours, Caesar, if not now, when? If not now, when. So my book chronicles the 2024 race. The Indy 500 is no longer kind of like the month of May like it was in the past. So I kind of designed it as a diary. It ends with the last two laps, the 2023 race, and then goes through the entire year as racers and their teams and their sponsors get ready for the 2024 edition of the Indy 500. And that's the book. It ends with the victory banquet the day after the 2024 Indy 500.
Oh, nice. That's really great to hear. Again, I'll definitely check out that book, and me myself with multiple myeloma. And again, like I said, I'll be sure to leave links in the description so other people could check it out, because yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that also like the Indy 500, or just sports in general, so it definitely seems like a very interesting read. So I'll be sure to check it out, and I'm sure hopefully other people will check it out as well.
Yeah, and if those of you in the audience out there who do read any of the books, when you're done, please, I'd encourage you to leave your authentic review at any bookseller site. Reviews help other readers determine whether they want to, take a shot on the book or not. And it also, helps with search algorithms, once you have a certain number of reviews. So, please leave I'm not pandering for 5 stars. Just want you to give your authentic review. It's super helpful for the audience and future readers.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's good. Good. I want to transition into the musical side um, of your life, and which is one of the questions that I want to ask, which was, how do you balance writing and music in your current artistic pursuits?
Yeah, it's hard, difficult balance. I find it to be difficult. I have another book coming out in October. It's my first ever novel that I've attempted, and so I'm in the process of doing the final review of the interior design of that book, the exterior design, the cover, and the like. It's a novel called Outflanked. It's a thriller. The genre is espionage thriller, and it will come out October 28th on Tuesday. So there's trying to get that book to come to market. There's writing of 2 other books I have going on. There's freelance work that I do as a marketing consultant, and so sometimes it's very difficult to. For me, my music is centered around acoustic, writing on an acoustic guitar and an electric guitar. So it's getting over to the guitar, noodling around, coming up with some things, and the more time you spend on say writing or editing or what have you, there's sometimes less time to get to the musics. I have to very consciously block out time. Music Monday, and there's the focus for Monday. I might have some inspiration that I might need to get to the keyboard with and do some writing with, but let's see what I can do from a music perspective on that day. And then there's just trying to carve out in just 30 minutes to an hour to practice on instruments. And then, part of that is the noodling around process to come up with, cool little riffs that, maybe you can turn into a song. Like, hey, this would be kind of a cool little, verse, repeat that a couple times. And then like maybe, what kind of a chorus could go with this verse? And so, I appreciate your question. As you get busy doing some things, it's very difficult to partition up your time from one creative pursuit to another pursuit, just because you're trying to you kind of get into a zone, and then before you know it, your day's gone away.
Mhm. Yeah, and I appreciate that, like your passion and your drive to do both writing and music. I feel like that's really great to hear, and I'm sure there's other artists out there that are also trying to balance other passions in their lives. And I mean, it is tough, because there's never enough like time in the day to to do that. But if you're really passionate about something, you'll make the time to do it. You'll make the time to finish writing that book, or to finish writing that song, or to make a film, or to finish the painting. So there's just so much creative outlets out there. So I feel like it's always great to have that, even if you don't do it as like a full-time career. It's always good to sort of have that in, like, doing it part-time, or just sort of like in your back pocket. Just have that creativity inside of you, because life can get hard sometimes, a lot of,
Yeah.
it's unexpected, a lot of stuff can happen. So as long as you can go back to like that happy place and, doing whatever it is you're writing or film or whatever it is,
And
so
you have those, responsibilities in your life. I understand it, and it's, how do you get that catalyst to get started? Some of you are out there, you've got meals you need to prepare, you've got the parent, you've got, full-time jobs and things like that. And so, Caesar, you used the term outlet. And I think that's, an important thing. Everyone needs their outlets, it's just kind of part of a coping strategy with the stress and responsibilities that we have in our life. The one thing I like to talk to with people who are like wanting to explore their kind of creative aspects of their personality, of their whole being, is that it doesn't take a lot. When you start thinking about like a book, like you can pick up any book. There's a book I just recently read, and you're like, wow, that's just like too much. This book is 352 pages long. It's 352 pages. And you get kind of you get kind of scared of thinking about the end result. It's like, man, I don't have time to write a 352 page book. It's like, you might not, but do you have time to write, a couple of hundred words, and just kind of get started? If not now, when? If you want to learn how to play guitar, it's like, well, yeah, that seems to be like a daunting proposition. But how about if you just learn like one chord today, right? And you can practice that chord for 10 minutes, and then next week you can practice another chord, say a G today and a D tomorrow, and then you can spend 30 minutes just going from G to D to G to D to G to D. Guess what? You throw up one more chord in there. Let's throw a C chord in there. You pretty much can play almost any song that you want to with a G, a D, and a C chord. There's the annuals of music are filled with 3 chord songs, and you don't need to think about the 10,000 or 20,000 hours for you to be a concert guitarist. Instead, 30 minutes a day, and you can play songs in a short period of time. So try to those of you who've got things out there that you want to give it a try, give it a try. Don't think you have to finish. Don't get kind of caught up in like, wow, what's it going to take to finish my book? That's the easy part. The hard part is getting started. Just get started. Whether it's writing a couple hundred words for your book, if it's picking up a guitar and learning a chord or two or three, get started. You'll find that you'll be able to take the next step and the next step and the next step. But none of those steps are possible without the first step.
yeah, that's really great advice, because I've been in that sort of same position where maybe I'm thinking of like the end result and it's like, oh, like how do I, like make this really great film, or sometimes I'm like comparing myself to others, like, oh, that person has so much success, and and it's like everyone has like their own journey, and it's like you said, just taking it one step at a time. Even it might seem like such a small thing, but if you look back like at the end of the year or the end of the month or something, and you realize like, you've made so much progress than that first time you just started, and it's great to do that, just like little stuff, whether it's like writing like a page or just figuring out, like you said, like those notes, the G, the D, the C, um, little things like that. And then by the time, a certain time comes and you put that all into play, it's like, oh wow, I've made so much more progress than I had thought, So it's really great to, just taking it one step at a time, and don't think about like the big picture, and just taking it one step at a time. I mean, that's really great.
Yeah, don't get overwhelmed, and because you can look at that, like, wow, a 2 hour movie. That's hard to make, But yeah, but that first minute scene, let's start with that one. It's a one step at a time. You'll get there. You've got it in you, and reframe some of your thinking, right? Don't be afraid to fail, and take that word impossible, just kind of change it around a little bit. That's same word, just I apostrophe impossible. I'm possible. Take that impossible, turn it around to I'm possible. You can do this. All of you out there can do it. And just get started. That's It's the one thing when, some people ask me, how can I write a book? Well, to be a writer, you need to start writing. If not now, when, today's a good day to start. Just get out there and do it. And, I just talked, earlier in this episode, about a 60,000 word book, that's 500 words a day for 120 days. That's 4 months. That's what a novel length is about 60,000 words. Think about it that way. 500 words is not that much. It's, if you've got a little bit of dialogue popping around in your head, that's probably a couple hundred words right there. Just a couple of people having a conversation in your story. So get started, folks. First step.
There you go. Yeah. If you're a writer, if you want to be a writer, just write. If you want to make films, make a film. If you want to be a musician, write music. And again, it doesn't have to be like this big, grand thing. If it's, as long as you make a little something, it's like, boom, there you go. You're a musician, you're a filmmaker, you're a writer, you're an artist. So again, just
and it's fun putting that stuff out there. We talk about, it can be nerve wracking. It can be. I don't like the way I sing, but there's times when I'll throw a demo out there. I recently put a song out called The Weekend. It's just a raw acoustic demo, just trying to get some reaction. I used to live in the Bay Area. There's a blues artist. He's won a couple of Grammys. His stage name is the Fantastic Negretto. And he's won Grammys for blues. And he's an old R&B singer who has reinvented himself as a blues person. And when we first got into the genre, where he went around was in the Bay Area, the mass transportation train system's called BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit. And so the Fantastic Negretto would set up and would play his new music to commuters. With the idea that, man, if I can get somebody on their morning commute or the afternoon commute, when they're just focused about either getting to work or getting home, if I can resonate with them to the point where they stop and pay me some attention, maybe I'm onto something. And maybe he is onto something because he has 2 Grammy Awards now at this point in time, right? So, I loved his approach about, just kind of like, sending one downrange, and seeing what can happen. And it's kind of fun. Some people go, that's horrible. Other people, I just had a comment the other day from a fellow, man, I love your music. I'm like, that's so rewarding to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And like you said, getting like that feedback, especially getting like that positive feedback, I mean, it just makes you feel so good inside, and it makes you realize like all that hard work and all that time and stuff, it was worth it. Even if it convinced like one person or 100 people, as long as you just get like that, as we said, that reaction, especially like the right reaction, it makes it like it seem all that stress and all that trouble and all that was worth it in the end.
And I would even go to say it doesn't even take that one person. It just takes you as the creator. Sometimes I'll draw the analogy to somebody who's building a jigsaw puzzle in their house. No one else sees this jigsaw puzzle. It's just a person working at their dining room table or something, putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle. Is for you, right? If you find satisfaction in it, even if nobody even sees your stuff, that's the most important thing. Then, if you do want to see if like, wow, I've got a story or if I've got a message that has something I want to share, then start sharing it and get people's reaction. But remember, your first customer and, maybe your most important customer is also yourself, right? You as an artist, and what you're thinking. And sometimes, people only go as far as that, they're, that's the satisfaction that they already get. I usually want to go a little step further and see what other people think to see if, validate what I think about what I've produced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, again, it's great to hear. And it's really cool that you say all it takes is you, if you like it, then you've done it, and if nobody ever sees it or anything like that, but if you're satisfied with it, that could just be
enough. It's like painting a room in your house, right? You've picked out 2 different colors for the 4 different walls of a particular room, and you paint it. How many people actually see, that spare bedroom in your house that you repainted or whatever? But you sit back and go, yeah, I like what I did here. This is cool. Get out there and do it. And I just can't emphasize that enough. You've got those ideas out there. What's your vision? Take that first step and try to, accomplish what you visualized.
Yeah. Appreciate the little things in life, it may seem small, but it can be really, really worth it to someone. It could have such a deep meaning to them. Um, I want to start to wrap up. So, is there any like last minute advice that you want to give to any up and coming artist out there that's listening in on this?
Yeah, there's bumpy spots, right? I remember I had a stem cell transplant as part of my treatment in my second birthday is what they call it, is November 5th, 2019. And I remember one of my doctors talking to me. He's like, when you, as the recovery takes place, don't look day over day. And instead try to look week over week on how you're feeling and how you're recovering from this process, and how your, physical condition and mental, emotional, well-being is going. And I kind of like to take that approach when it comes to, the arts and the creativity and things like that. It's, there's going to be these ups and downs, and how you feel, maybe the reaction you're getting, book sales, music sales, or what have you. But try not to get too caught up in the highs and too caught up in the lows. You've got in your mind, where you're wanting to go, and just kind of look for those trend lines. Is the trend line going the direction that I want to go? If I'm trying to create a book, some days I can write 1,000 words, some days it's 15 words, but am I at least, kind of making progress toward to telling my story and getting my story on paper? So, don't, be careful about the highs and the lows. There are going to be some highs and there are going to be lows. Expect that. It's normal. And then just, know that everything's kind of like a process. Sometimes this process can happen super fast, like particularly with a song. I find because the songs are typically only, 2.5 to 4 minutes long, right? And so much of it's repetitive: verse, chorus, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, and you're out the door. That's every country song ever written, and they can kind of go pretty quickly. So, but sometimes those come together, and that's great. Other times it's a bit of a process. I like this, but I need to take a step away from it, or maybe I need to revisit some other song and say, maybe borrow a part from that and put it in here. So keep in mind it's a process. We talked about taking that first step, but it's step after step after step, and you just keep pursuing your dream, your vision, and go for it. If not now, when? Punch today in the face.
There you go. If not now, when? And take that first step. It's a very important step. As soon as you get going, just see where it takes you, and the end result could be a very positive experience. So
yeah, I think it's almost always a positive experience. You're going to learn introspectively. You're going to learn an awful lot about yourself and anything that you create, any kind of creative process that you go about, and that alone is probably worth the journey. All right, but at the same time, you look at some of these amazing things coming out. One of my favorite writers is a guy named, I believe his name's Andy Weir. He wrote The Martian. And he self-published that book. I believe he's a software development engineer, but he had this passion about space, and so he's just started writing. He's written the Martian, turned into a movie with Matt Damon. It was a great movie. I believe that was a self-published book. Another book called Artemis, and one of my favorite fiction books that I've ever read, Project Hail Mary, which is in production right now to be a movie. Geez, I forget the guy I forget the guy who's playing the lead character, but he's a big star. I just love Andy Weir's story in that he's a guy who just had a passion as a consumer of wanting to learn more and more about space, and turned that into a super successful writing career, just by following along his passion and doing what he wanted to do. And for me, that's like a beacon, kind of a guiding light. It's like, hey, I want to do things like that. Back to that timeline exercise, Caesar. If I take time for granted, what are the things that mean most important to me, and who do I want to do it with? Who are those people and those relationships that I want to foster and build to do that? And, you do that, and you're going to end up with that inner sense of peace, that peace of mind, and that feeling of accomplishment.
yeah, I think that's a great stopping point. I think we've definitely talked a lot, got a lot of good advice, and it was really great just to hear your story And
It's great being here, Caesar. Again, I appreciate the opportunity. I love what you're doing with Troubled Artists. I think it's super cool. So, being able to be just a small part of that, super rewarding for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Troubled Artists podcast. Have a great day.